So if you're new here, you might not know that I've been a tarot reader for 10 years. And even though I've been reading tarot for 10 years and I had a tarot channel for 8 years, I never professed to be a psychic. But today I'm going to try my hand at it and I'm going to predict some of my upcoming 5-star reads. I've got two main categories. I've got a bunch of books by authors that I've already read with other books that I'm really excited to read by them. And then I've got some books by authors that I've never read, but I'm convinced I'm going to love. So let's start with the books by the authors that I have already read before, because I feel like these are probably the most likely, in theory, to be correct. The first one is the Raybearer series. Now I have read Raybearer, the first book in this series by Jordan Ifueko. I listened to it on audiobook a couple of years ago, and honestly I think this is the thing that has like low-key, slowly over time inspired me to start reading more fantasy. I do want to reread it before I get to Redemptor, but I'm convinced that this is going to be a duology that I adore. The first book from memory was 5 stars. I think the second book will be, and I feel like this is going to be a series that I quote as one of my favorites. At least I really hope so. This is an incredible high fantasy YA duology. Like I said, I loved Raybearer, and I think primarily, although I did really enjoy the story and the twists and turns, what I found so incredible was both the characters and the world building. Considering this is not like a massive book, I just remember everything feeling so rich and alive. And those are things that are really important to me. So the fact that Jordan Ifueko can do that so well just makes me so excited to finally get to the second book. Next is an Australian middle fiction title. It is A Glass House by Shirley Ma. This is a book that I've been meaning to read for quite a while. I recently read Shirley Ma's very recent release, All 4 Quarters of the Moon. I read it in a vlog. I'll leave a link to it in the cards above. I gave that a 4-star. I really liked it. But from what I've heard of this book, I feel like this is going to be even more up my alley, and it's just been shortlisted for the Readings Children's Prize, so other people love it too. This is a story about identity and belonging told through a magical realism lens, which, I mean, if we had to sum up my core taste in reading, I think that would be it. The next book that I'm hoping will be a 5-star read from me is You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi. Now, I have read a couple of Akwaeke's books. Some of them I have appreciated without falling in love with, but one book that I absolutely adored and was one of my favorite reads of the year was The Death of Vivek Oji. And I think I even said in a video around the time that I read that book that I adored it, but it left me wanting like a romance story from Akwaeke Emezi. Obviously there is a romance element in The Death of Vivek Oji, but it's not really a romance book. And I don't know that this is exactly a quintessential romance, but it definitely leans more into that. I know this has been a bit divisive, so maybe it's a bit risky putting it on this list, but I just love The Death of Vivek Oji so much that I really, really want this to be a 5-star read as well. Then a book from an author that I've only read one book from, but I'm convinced will be a favorite author of mine, and she better not let me down. It's Becky Chambers and The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. The book that I have read by Becky Chambers is A Psalm for the Wild Built, which is one of my favorite books of the year. I just adored it. It's one of those books that I've already like reread many passages from. I just love it. And I know in my heart that Becky Chambers could very well be a new favorite author for me. I've heard this series described as cozy slice of life space adventure. I already know from A Psalm for the Wild Built that Becky Chambers definitely likes to provide plenty of representation of different experiences in her stories, which is something I appreciate and I loved reading about. And overall, these books are supposed to be just like a good, fun time, like a happy time. Imagine reading a happy book. I'm really looking forward to it. This is another one that is the second book in a series that I am just really convinced is going to be a favorite, and God, I hope it is. That is the second book in the Broken Earth trilogy, The Obelisk Gate by N.K. Jemisin. I did a vlog reading 3 different N.K. Jemisin works a couple of months ago, and in that I read the first book in the Broken Earth trilogy and I was obsessed with it. Absolutely loved it. I think given the fact that I haven't liked everything else that I've read by N.K. Jemisin, this does leave me a little bit nervous, like kind of going from one of my favorite fantasy books I've ever read into the second book in the series. But I mean, she did everything so well in that book, and she won the Hugo Prize for every book in the series. Like, clearly she did right by this series, so I have to trust her and just dive in, because I just know that this series has so much potential to be a 5-star favorite read of all time for me, and I hope that book 2 will be a 5-star as well. Next up, we've got With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo. I honestly don't know a whole lot about what this book is about, but I've read a couple of other books by Elizabeth Acevedo, and I don't think I've ever given her anything under 4 stars. And honestly, one of her books got me out of a reading slump one time. So I know that I love Elizabeth Acevedo's writing style and her stories and her characters in particular. All I really know from the blurb is that this is about a teen mum sort of dealing with life and dealing with things. So Definitely a subject that I haven't read a whole lot about, and definitely a book I want to read, partly because I want to read everything Elizabeth Aceveto's ever written, but also because it's a YA title and we sell it at work, and of course because of that track record I have with the author, and I just know this is going to be another banger. Basically, she can do no wrong in my eyes. And then the last book in this category of authors that I've already read is actually a non-fiction. This is Haldol and Hyacinth's A Bipolar Life by Melody Moeasy. I read The Roomy Prescription by Melody Moeasy with my book club several months ago, and it just hit so close to home, and I adored it. There's no other way to say it. In that book, Melody explores her experience of sort of straddling the line very intentionally between mental ill health and religion and spirituality and spiritual experience. And that is a line I think is so difficult to walk. It's a very authentic, genuine line that I don't think we often get to talk enough about as people with complex mental health experiences. But I understand that it's very challenging to do right and to do safely. And for me, I don't think anyone has done it better than Melody Moeasy in The Roomy Prescription. So immediately after finishing that book, I knew I wanted to read more from her. Clearly, I haven't got around to it yet, but I am excited to get to this one. I don't think this one will have the same focus on religion and spirituality that The Roomy Prescription did, but I loved the way that Melody wrote. Like, literally her writing is very lyrical, it's beautiful, but also the way that she's able to tap into and then express her lived experience in such a beautiful way, in a way that I really identify with a lot of the time, but also in a way that I just found awe-inspiring, to be perfectly honest. I just know that I'm going to love this book too. Okay, now onto the books by authors that I have never read from before. Basically, these are the books that I've bought 100% into the hype for, and I'm convinced I'm going to love, with no evidence to back it up other than my feelings. Most of these are fantasy of some kind, because obviously that is what I've been picking up a lot of lately and what I'm excited to read. The first is Witchmark by C.L. Polk. I honestly don't remember where I first heard about this book or who recommended it to me. I think I just sort of found it while I was looking for cozy fantasy stories. And this is one that came up, and I remember when I was talking to you in a hall about this book and I was reading the back, and I was just sitting here getting all giddy about how much I already loved it and loved the main character. Elizabeth Bear says this book has romance, mystery, witch battles, and bicycle chases. Everything about this just excites me more. The next is Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. This is one that I've 100% just bought into the hype around. I don't even know that I know a whole lot about it. I just keep hearing people rave about it. I don't think it's a fairy tale retelling, but it's got fairy tale-esque vibes. And from what I can tell, T. Kingfisher is already an author that a lot of people really love, but there's something quite special about this book, and people are loving it at the moment, and I reckon I will too. One of the things that convinced me of that was the little opening part to the blurb, which says, "This isn't a fairy tale where the princess meets a prince. It's the one where she kills him." Alexi Harrow says, "Nettle and Bone is what happens when all the overlooked bit players of classic fantasy somehow wind up on the main quest. It's funny, frightening, and full of heart. I loved it." I've mentioned before that I'm not really someone who needs to know a whole lot about a plot before I dive in. I'm much more interested in knowing about the feeling of the book, the vibes, if you will. And these vibes sound immaculate. Another one that I bought into the hype around, and I am 100% convinced, is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. A slice of life fantasy about a warrior orc who becomes a barista and runs her own cafe. I'm sold. That's literally all I have to say. This sounds like everything I've ever wanted in any kind of storytelling ever. Then a book that I think I heard about from Hannah at A Clockwork Reader, I might be wrong, is Miracles of the Nyamya General Store. This is a book that I have not heard a whole lot about, but I remember whoever that I did hear about it on YouTube, I think it was Hannah, and then reading this blurb, I'm just convinced this is going to be a new favorite book. When three delinquents hole up in an abandoned general store after their most recent robbery, to their great surprise, a letter drops through the mail slot in the store's shutter. This seemingly simple request for advice sets the trio on a journey of discovery, as over the course of a single night, they step into the role of the kind-hearted former shopkeeper who devoted his waning years to offering thoughtful counsel to his correspondents. Through the lens of time, they share insight with those seeking guidance, and by morning, none of their lives will ever be the same. Have you ever heard anything more gorgeous? Plus, this cover literally looks like it could come straight from one of those lo-fi music YouTube videos. You know exactly what I mean. Next is a book I've heard many people describe as one of their favorite fantasy standalones of all time. It's The Sword of Kaigan by M.L. Wang. I think this is a fantasy story focused a lot on war and the effects of war with an elemental magic system. It's independently published and it's become a bit of a booktube darling, and I've just totally bought into all of that hype. Next is the first in a middle grade series. I think it's about 5 or 6 books long. I already own the first 3 because I'm that sure I'm gonna love it. And for some reason I pulled book 3 off my shelf rather than book 1 to show you, but it's Arusha. It's the Arusha series. I haven't read any of this series yet, but it sounds amazing and I'm really excited to finally get to it. A review on the back says that the series is a mix of Hindu mythology and folklore, feminism and witty dialogue, which creates an uproarious novel for young readers. And this roller coaster through Hindu culture never feels forced or pedantic, but instead like like a new kind of myth where a hero takes a hammer to the world to shine a light through its cracks. It just sounds incredible, and the covers are amazing. I'm excited. And then finally, a book that is a little bit divisive, but I'm convinced I'm gonna love it. In fact, this is what inspired me to do this video. This is A Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan, and it's the first in the Lady Trent series. From what I can tell, this is basically written as a memoir of Lady Trent, a woman who lived in Victorian or Edwardian England and was like the expert on dragons. Literature Science Alliance 100% sold me on this, and I'm just convinced this is going to be a new favorite book for me. Absolutely convinced. Honestly, my expectations are unhealthily high at this point, and if it's anything less than 4.5 stars, I will be like gutted. I know you shouldn't do that for a book. It's not good for anybody, but I just am so excited for this. I'm convinced. I can't help it. Like I said, I understand that putting high expectations on books is not always the best thing to do, but what can I say? I've bought into the hype. I'm really excited to read all of these, and they genuinely sound like things that I'm really going to love. To be perfectly honest, I don't know that 5-star predictions is maybe like the best way for me to frame how I'm thinking of these books. I would definitely say that I am expecting to love these, and I think for me that's like 4 or 5 stars. A 5-star is quite an elusive, like it's an X factor that you can't quite put your finger on. And I don't know that I can really predict that, but I'm pretty sure, and I'm damn hopeful, that the vast majority of these will be at the very least 4-star books for me. I'd love to hear in the comments below if you have some 5-star predictions for yourself and what you think those might be and why. Thanks for hanging out with me in this video. I hope you enjoyed. A big thank you goes to my patrons over on Patreon, especially to Livia, Lynette Brown, and Marie for their very generous support. And I will talk to you in the comments below and in the next video. And until then, I'm wishing you many 5-star reads. Bye.